Well, welcome everybody to the first ever GC Melbourne, Australia podcast. I'm Stassja and with me is Angela.
Hi.
How you going, Angela?
I'm well. How are you?
Pretty good, pretty good. Did my first podcast yesterday.
Woohoo.
Well, interview with Kat Kariner.
Yeah.
She's with LGB Alliance Australia, and I think it went all right. I think I can do this. Ready to put
Yeah.
my face out there and
Yeah.
own this.
Yep. It's the only way.
I think so. And, it's just going to take more and more people speaking out and willing to stick their head above the parapet. You've just got to come out of the closet, come out of the gender critical closet, everyone, and join us.
There's a lot of misunderstanding about people that are gender critical. There's a lot of misinformation out there. There's a lot of labeling and, bad press about people who basically state facts and refuse to be indoctrinated into the gender cult. Like, disagreeing with someone isn't hate. Having an opposing opinion isn't bigotry. And, we've been painted to be these horrible, horrible people, and nobody from the GC movement that I know personally is horrible. Nobody's, defamatory or nasty or, bigoted in any conceivable way. And yet we have such a bad name. So I think, at this point, with self-ID in Melbourne, with so much happening that impacts on women and children, we have to show our faces and represent all the people, which is, I believe, the majority of people who stand on the side of reality.
Yep. And I think it's just a matter of time before the rest of Australia cottons on to what's actually happening, how far this legislation has gone. And, we know from polling done overseas in the USA and the UK that the majority of people aren't comfortable with this. And so why are we pushing? This is meant to be a democracy. So why are we having this sort of legislation pushed on us? It's just mind-boggling.
I think people think it's just an ideological issue and it's a belief system, but what they don't understand is the legislation and also the corporate capture that's involved and how much money is being funneled into places like gender clinics, which are, promoting an ideology that's harmful. And people just think it's, but you don't believe trans women are women. It's not that simple. There's a whole bunch of other stuff that's going on that directly impacts on the average person. Mm-hmm. And they don't even realize until it's too late, until they're in a hospital, in a mental health ward that's, segregated by sex for, the protection of each sex. Mm-hmm. And they're in a room with two beds, and then the other bed is a trans woman. Mm-hmm. That's the sort of stuff that I'm hearing back from the community that's happening to people. And that's their peak trans moment. That until then, they've just thought, we better be nice and we better give these people with an obvious mental illness the compassion that they deserve. And they do deserve compassion, but they don't deserve the right to impose their belief system on other people in a way that negatively impacts their life.
Agree completely. And you just reminded me of a story someone shared in the Facebook group that I run. So she's an older woman from rural Victoria, and she travelled into Melbourne for something or other, and stopped at a service station for a wee. She walks in there, and there's a trans woman who proceeds to put his hand up his skirt and adjust his cock and balls to whatever's comfortable right in front of her. It was making eye contact with her while he's doing that. And, okay, she's not in physical danger, but how uncomfortable is that? Why should women have to be subjected to that sort of thing just in the toilets?
Yeah, and the thing is, if you complain, then you're a bigot. Because I've also been in situations where I've not expected to see a trans woman, and even me, as outspoken as I am, have frozen and just thought, oh my God, what the hell's he doing here? And we're not talking about people like Blair White who are female passing. You know, I see people, I go about my day and I see people that, you know, I rightly probably assume that are transgender, and they've had the full gender reassignment and they're just going about their business. They don't bother me. It's the majority of trans women who still present as male, but male with breasts, usually sexually like objectified versions of womanhood. And they're the ones that are in the female only spaces. They're the ones that are, you know, invading AA meetings and domestic violence shelters and demanding entry into women's, you know, change rooms in swimming pools and things like that. It's not these female passing, you know, transsexuals, which I do not have any problem with whatsoever. It is these caricatures of womanhood that maintain all their, you know, male attributes, including their attitude towards women, which is quite, you know, horrible, and then insist that they are us.
That's it. You just reminded me, the Philia conference was on in the UK over this weekend, and have you seen the pictures of the trans protesters?
Yeah, and I saw their chants as well, and it sounded like a religious cult. Just scary. And you know, I read reports that there were women in there talking about, you know, rape and all these horrible things, female genital mutilation and other horrible things that happen to women, particularly women from other cultures. And all you could hear in the background was trans women are women, trans women are women, over the top of these women, you know, and that's horrible, but it's also symbolic of the way that, you know, they function, in that they're drowning out all the other voices of all the women the world over to center themselves in our issues. It's just horrible.
Yeah, it's a little bit like a parasite sort of movement. It's latched onto women's rights, and it's latched onto LGB rights, and they're pretending that the issues for women and trans women are the same. No. They're not.
No.
They're pretending that the issues for LGB people and trans people are the same, and they're not. You know, the issues are so different. Trans women and women really don't have a lot in common.
No.
Just gonna say it.
Well, they have the same in common that men and women have in common, and that's some things, but not everything. You know.
Yeah.
I just find the whole thing just ludicrous. I can't even believe we are here having this conversation.
Yeah.
You know, it's just crazy, crazy, crazy. And I think of gender ideology as a cult, because I've actually known trans people my whole life, and I've watched them fall into this ideology, you know, from sane and rational thinking people. You know, usually some significant trauma happens, and then all of a sudden they're sprouting this stuff. You know, it reminds me of some of the fundamentalist religious groups. And, you know, once they're in the cult, you know, you're out, and anyone who doesn't affirm all the things that they believe is the enemy, you know. And it's just horrid. It's awful to watch someone you care about go from, you know, someone who's struggling with a personal issue to someone who's being like indoctrinated and dragged down this ideological pathway that just doesn't seem to make sense. And it's certainly not giving them a solution. It's just giving them more and more tasks to do, like a carrot on a stick that's never actually going to give them the peace that they're seeking. It's only just a pathway. It's not a resolution.
Yeah, that's right. And it's this idea that once I have the surgery, everything, my life is going to be perfect. And from what I hear, like that'll last for a couple of years. You will have these people might have that sort of gender euphoria, they call it, that lasts for a few years, and then it's just back to reality. And then apparently amongst transsexual people who have undergone sex reassignment surgery, there's apparently this 10-year thing. Around the 10-year mark is when they will fall into a very deep depression all over again. That's when suicides are likely to happen or be attempted. And you know, we really need long-term studies into how these treatments are affecting people.
Well, the trans people I know that transitioned 20, 30 years ago, they live very small lives. Like it hasn't, they've, you know, they just go about their life. My understanding is that they, you know, are still using like drugs and alcohol and things to escape. You know, it's not been this cure-all for their mental health issues or their feelings of, you know, being ostracized from society. It's actually just been a band-aid, you know, and the issues are still there, even though they're physically, you know, finished transition. They're still like, you know, ostracized and feeling separated from mainstream society. They don't fit anywhere anymore.
Look, it must be such a hard life, you know, and I just want to say that, you know, we have a lot of compassion for transgender people and what they go through, and
sure.
this misperception that, you know, we hate trans people and we want them dead, it's just so far from the mark. You know, a lot of the work that we do is around, you know, women's rights, protecting children from making lifelong decisions that they're probably going to regret, and advocating for LGB people as well. They're probably the three main areas. But, you know, ultimately, we care about trans people as well. And, yeah, it's just frustrating and very Orwellian to be painted as bigots and hateful and transphobic. It's just upside down.
See, I see, you know, body dysphoria or gender dysphoria and those things, or even anorexia and those illnesses as forms of dissociation. That, you know, some traumatic event or experience has happened and the person's become, you know, dissociated from their body. So, you know, I don't understand why transgenderism is the only one of those conditions in which it's affirmed, except that there's money to be made from it. There's money to be made from, you know, pumping people through full of hormones and surgery, you know, millions of dollars per person. I think it's over $1 million per person throughout the lifespan if a child was to transition. You know, there's no money in affirming an anorexic because they will die. You know, there's, you know, you don't affirm someone, you know, with body dysphoria because they will go on and have all those, you know, ridiculous surgeries and things and make themselves quite disfigured, you know, and that they recognize that, and yet they don't recognize it when it comes to gender. You know, I just think that people are being sold a lie, and the best treatment for trauma in all but the very minority of cases is to treat the trauma, not to try and match the body to the traumatized brain. It doesn't make sense. And it's not compassionate, you know, and it's not acknowledging all the reasons why someone would hate themselves, because you must absolutely and utterly hate yourself to want to hack off your own body parts in order to, you know, think that you feel that like you're the opposite sex.
I think for the average person, the thought of going through sex reassignment surgery is terrifying, absolutely terrifying. That we, and I'm not sure that. Look, I'm just going to say it. Something happened in our group this week. We had a transgender woman in our group since we began last year. And he still goes by he, him, so I'm going to use he, him. I made a public post. It was a screenshot of a transgender woman talking about how some complications she'd had from the surgery, and that she now had hair growing in places where it shouldn't be. And she was really worried about this hair, but a week prior, she had some complication where she ended up in at the emergency room and had to have surgery there on the spot to stop a hemorrhage. But she was so focused in this post, she was so concerned about the hair that was growing. So for those who don't know, for male to female, they'll use scrotal tissue to turn it into sort of a faux labia.
Pardon me.
So she's got all this hair growing inside in the labia, and that's what she was concerned about. And so I posted this, and I with the comment, it seems like these surgeries often cause more dysphoria for people. Are they? I don't know if I've said, but are these? Is it ethical to be doing this to people? Should these surgeries be banned altogether for adults? What do you think? And we got about 68 comments. Maybe 2 or 3 of those comments were, yes, it should be banned. But then the transgender woman that's in our group, he's taken issue with this post.
Sorry, I'm having a coughing fit.
Oh, no.
Oh, pardon, it's not COVID, I swear. Everyone has got COVID, but I haven't. Not yet, touch wood. Yeah. Sorry.
He's taken issue with this post and thinks that it's transphobic, and he's taken it really personally. He's left the group. He's now writing to the Mercury newspaper in Tasmania to denounce our group. I'm just so disappointed, and you know, it feels a lot to me like another version of trans activism in which there's no debate. We're not allowed to talk about these issues.
No.
And also he's sort of attempting to get us cancelled.
Yeah.
I'm just, really disappointed. I've tried to include transgender people because I think they are, there are gender critical trans people out there, and their voices are needed in this fight. It's time for them to step up as well, and start speaking out about what's being done in their name. So now I'm just like, I'm not sure we can work side by side in the way that I envisioned, but what I'd really like to see come out of it is this particular trans woman, he needs to start a gender critical group for trans people in Australia, and they need to start doing their own work on this. That's where I've come out of all this. Well,
surely the response, if he's genuinely gender critical, even if he's disheartened with the group, the response shouldn't be to cancel a gender critical group, because we have the same goals, and that is to raise awareness.
That's it.
So to actually attack the group. But then because I consider transgenderism to be like a cult, but if you think about communicating with people that are within the cult, that are practicing within the cult, you have exactly the same response, stonewalling, no debate, how dare you, just attack, because they just have the cognitive dissonance and they don't want to hear the truth. They just don't want it. They can't accept it. Now, if this person is trans-identifying, although, they are gender critical, you've still got to, think that they are, it's like they're still infected by the cult of transgenderism. Therefore, they're not really thinking straight, and they're having a very typical response. It kind of feeds into the fact, that we try and build a bridge to open communication with them, but it always ends up in being attacked, always, every time. And we get called all sorts of negative things and accused of bigotry and things for stating facts. And there's people who are disrespectful on both sides of this debate, but the vast majority of people try and have respectful discussions with their opponents. Otherwise, our whole argument falls flat. We don't want to be horrible people. We want to have an open discussion about issues that affect us. So, painting us all as bigots and nasty people it's not really helping anyone's argument, either theirs or ours. But I'm not surprised, you know, I'm not surprised if someone's trans identifying and then suddenly turns on us. You know, it just seems to be the way that people who have been indoctrinated into that ideology behave, you know, without exception, you know, until they detransition. And then what do detransitioners say? They say, oh, you know, I had cognitive dissonance, or I was in denial. And then when I woke up, you know, so they have the same sort of, you know, they explain that what we're suggesting was possibly true, that, you know, that's just the cult impacting on their thinking, you know, that they can't possibly agree with anything we say ever. Otherwise they can't be in the cult. And, you know, the cult itself will cancel them for even thinking something remotely gender critical, or even suggesting, you know, asking a question.
You just reminded me, I can't remember her name, but there was an American detransitioner. She had curly red hair and she was doing a lot of podcasts and things. I can't remember her name, but and I friended her on Facebook, and then she'd done all these interviews and was out and proud about being a detransitioner. And then out of nowhere, she made this post on Facebook along the lines of, I've aligned with people that I shouldn't have aligned with. You know, there are big issues in the gender critical movement. And I read this, and I think she's deactivated her account now. I haven't seen her online in a long time. But it was like she had broken away from the cult, if we want to call it that. But the programming was so strong that she's like, I can't actually be seen to be associating with the opposition. They've been my opposition for 10 years or whatever. It was really sad. It was really sad, yeah.
There's, you know, general tribalism in society, and we notice it about the vaccines, you know, you notice it with all sorts of political viewpoints.
Left, right.
Yeah, this crazy tribalism, you know, and then there's people like me who are just don't like being told what to do by anyone and who float through the middle, you know. Yeah, so it's reflective of the division in society, and that's where this whole trans thing you know, has gone whoosh, like, you know, is because the division was planted, and it's been opportunistic to come in there and push it apart. And, you know, and there's argument that the whole trans thing came about as a response to Me Too, where women and women's trauma was, you know, brought to the forefront, and women were emboldened to call out misogynistic and, you know, damaging behaviour from men. And as a response, men have come in and centred themselves as the most disadvantaged and, you know, oppressed women. I mean, doesn't make sense.
It's crazy times.
Sorry.
I was just going to ask, did you have a peak trans moment? Like,
I've had so many. I think, you know, I've been anti-trans since I was a teenager, and you know, a woman that I was very, very close to, just trans, decided that she wasn't a butch lesbian anymore, that she was going to transition, and I had reservations about it then, and that was back, you know, in the early 90s. I'd always been around, you know, gay, effeminate men my whole life, so, you know, drag queens were trans back in the day. You know, it was, drag and trans kind of went together. That if someone was transsexual, then their only employment could be either in prostitution or as a drag queen. And I'd always gotten along well with, you know, effeminate men, basically. So I never had a problem with the whole trans thing until I was close to someone who wanted to transition. And then after that, you know, a decade or so later, my then 65-year-old father-in-law decided to transition. And that was like, you've got to be kidding. I mean, I'd known the guy for 15 years at that point, and there was absolutely no way that he was a woman. But now he is post-operative trans woman.
Wow.
Working as a nurse.
Wow.
Yeah, and that is just bizarre, you know, just completely bizarre. My daughter hasn't seen her grandfather for all these years since he's transitioned. My mother-in-law ended off dying shortly after he left her with all the family's money. And yeah, basically said, oh, well, I'm going off to become a woman. And she died shortly after that. That probably wasn't my peak trans moment, but I think Caitlyn Jenner coming out shortly after that didn't help. Because it's like, what's with all these old dudes, you know, these older men deciding not just that they want to look like us, or that they've got mental health issues that they feel that they can only treat by adopting a female persona. You know, that's if they've been through safeguarding, then that's okay. But to just change your mind like that, be affirmed and say you are a woman and entitled to all women's only spaces, jobs, whatever, nah, not having it.
Yeah.
And then after that, when I became a public TERF was probably 2015, when I saw our Bronwyn Winter on some debate on television at 2 a.m, just by accident. I don't even know why I was up. I think one of the kids had me awake, and I was watching this debate, and I'm like, oh, this woman, she's onto it. And it didn't seem controversial for women to stand up for women's sex-based rights back then.
Yeah.
You know, on after Me Too, it was like, yeah, you know, men aren't women. You know, what's going to stop some predator from saying, I'm a woman now and getting away with this crime? You know, that's common sense.
It's really happened in the blink of an eye, hasn't it?
Yeah, it has. It has. And people say, oh, trans people have been around forever, but they haven't. None of this ideology, none of this we are women has been around forever at all.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just mind-boggling how quickly it's happened. But then, you know, when you learn about the Denton's document, which has all these tips and tricks on how to get unpopular legislation passed in your country, and it's written for LGBTQIA+++ organizations and lobby groups in order to do it. And it's like, try not to get too much media attention. Why don't you want the general public to know about this? It's because the general public is going to object overwhelmingly. Yeah. Okay. Oh, have you listened to the Stonewall investigative report yet?
Yeah, I have actually. I haven't listened to all of it.
Yep.
But it frustrated me because, you know, our Stonewall is ACON, which was originally set up, you know, during AIDS to, you know, get rid of the stigma around HIV and, you know, same-sex attraction and things like that. And they've been very successful. And then they lobbied for same-sex marriage, which was a good thing. And then their money ran out and they've jumped onto the TQ plus bandwagon. And so they're our Stonewall, and the BBC and the ABC and SBS, you know, are the equivalent of each other. And so it was really interesting that the Brits have wised up and are brave enough to publish this. But here in Australia, we still have none of these media agencies, apart from Sky News, which, you know, personally, I don't watch, that is willing to run anything remotely gender critical. And that's feeding the idea that it's, you know, right wing and all this stuff. But the mainstream media and the left media, like ABC, traditional left media, like the ABC, refuse to run anything remotely gender critical and are just plugging the pro-trans argument. And they have the same vested interests as Stonewall and the BBC. That's
it. Yep, exact same scenario that's happened in the UK is happening here in Australia. The entire Australian Workplace Equalities Index is just a copy and paste straight from Stonewall's Champions in Diversity scheme. So what we can then assume is that organisations and companies that sign up to this program here in Australia, they're getting the same advice. So it's going to be stuff like, make sure all your employees put their pronouns in their email signature, and make sure that all of your toilets are now gender neutral. And it's like, you know what, when you make toilets gender neutral, I think you're going to increase the risk of sexual harassment cases taking place in the toilets. And I would go so far as to say that just encountering a man in the toilets at work, for me, would be sexual harassment. You know,
all the public toilets, because the state government mandates public toilets, and all new public toilets in Victoria, say in parks, playgrounds, are all unisex with the, you know, stalls floor to ceiling. Now in the local town here, we have a unisex plus men's, and when you go to that, it's open in the middle, the stalls are on each side. So you go and you'll be in the toilet and you'll come out and there'll be like 6 tradies standing there, and it's really jolting. It's quite intimidating to open a floor to ceiling door and not know anyone's outside, and then open it up and there's all these men, you know. I mean, I'm 5 foot and I can defend myself, but, you know, I feel intimidated walking out at all hours of the day and night to a group of men milling around waiting their turn.
Yeah.
You know, and I honestly think that a lot of women, particularly minority women who are from different faiths and things, I think they just avoid going out because they don't want to have to go to the toilet. I mean, you can even go to McDonald's and their, you know, male and female toilets, but you can't even go to a park or, you know, anywhere like that now, because the state government says that, you know, they all have to be unisex. It's just wrong.
Yeah.
And they're introducing it into schools as well. So they found out here in Victoria that if your school has, you know, toilets, male and female, that need upgrading, that you're more likely to get funding if you rebuild and have unisex toilets, because you have to have less toilets. So that saves the government money than if you try and have your male and female toilets rebuilt or renovated. So, you know, school principals are being offered the carrot of new toilets, but only if they're unisex.
Wow.
Now, that's wrong.
Wow. Look, I don't know the full details, but I know that it happened in an area of Tasmania at a local school. They got new toilets put in. I'll have to find out the full story there, but it was something along the lines of, yep, they said that the toilets would be gender neutral, and then once the toilets were ready to be opened and used by the students, at that point they were able to say, well, actually, no, we're going to make them male and female still. So there is some kind of sneaky workaround, at least in Tasmania, Tasmanian schools. But, you know, parents need to step up. Parents need to start. You've probably seen in the US, Loudoun County, they've had a huge response from parents saying, enough is enough, we're not doing this anymore, this is ridiculous. And, you know, it would be really good to see parents getting involved and saying, we don't want this for our kids.
I'm that parent.
Awesome.
But it goes back to what we were saying before too, the financial vested interest, because ACON's in schools, ACON's in the education department, and we've got public funded orgs like VicPol, Victoria Police, the education department, the public service, with ACON in their ears and some kind of financial transactions taking place between the two of them that we're yet to establish through freedom of information, because they won't make that publicly available. But there's some kind of financial transaction going on. And parents are none the wiser. Nobody's any the wiser. You know, that these public, you know, institutions that are meant to be safe are actually advocating for things that are not safe, because there's some vested interest. And if you even scratch the surface even slightly, it goes back to this ACON, which is the equivalent of Stonewall in the UK. You know, and like people have pointed out, you know, put on a rainbow lanyard and say you're inclusive and everyone's like, yay, but actually do things like build ramps for kids who are disabled to get into their classroom without getting lifted over some stairs. No, nobody wants to do that. You know, it's all about the TQ plus. And, you know, indoctrinating everybody with that rather than be genuinely inclusive for kids or anyone.
Yep. I just thought of a funny story. I shared this on my public page as well. Well, funny. I'll tell you the story. You can decide for yourself. It was a teacher, I think, or a parent, and there was a school assembly. It was for a primary school in the UK. And the principal got up and said, well, we're glad to announce that the girls' toilets are now gender neutral toilets. So they left the boys as the boys' toilets, but the girls became gender neutral. And at the end of the school assembly, what happened? All the naughty boys who aren't trans or non-binary ran straight to the girls, well, the gender neutral toilets, and just because they could, you know. And, you know, if that's happening at a primary school level, come on, how naive do you have to be to not think that grown men are going to be doing that in public gender neutral toilets? Of course they are. And then add on to that, what happens in Japan. Japan has a really serious problem with spy cameras being put in women's toilets. And I read a great tweet the other day that was something along the lines of everything that women do in the toilets is a porn category.
Yeah.
It's like, you know,
no, it's true.
Come on, like, people, especially liberal feminists, like, are you that naive about the depths of male sexual depravity that is out there in the world at the moment? And no, it's not all men, but, you know, we don't know which men it is. So we want them all. Just give us our space back, thank you.
5 minutes on Twitter and you can see some depraved stuff.
Yeah.
And this is what's publicly available. Anyone can have a look.
Yeah.
If you follow, you know, a couple of different posts from people who are quite vocal about stuff, and, you know, they've got clips from their OnlyFans and stuff up there, and it's pervish stuff, the stuff that, you know, that, ugh, gross.
Yeah.
And it always portrays women and femininity and women's bodily functions in a very, very negative light.
Mm-hmm. I think Genevieve Gluck, I think that's how you say her surname, she does amazing work, like doing the deep dive into this seedy underbelly of autogynephilic transgenderism. If you don't follow her page, I really recommend it, everyone out there. She runs a public group called It's Not a Fetish, and she does the research. She'll watch sissy hypno porn, which is, you know, this subliminal programming designed to turn you into a transgender woman or a sissy girl or whatever sissy boy. And it's disturbing to listen to. And I've watched a few interviews with her, and in the second one I watched, it turned out that these pervs had used stuff that she had said in one of her earlier interviews and turned it into sissy hypno porn. So it's her voice running in the background. It's just shocking. Like, how icky would you feel? I feel for her, but thank you, Genevieve, for
doing
the work.
See, that's it. Most people don't know what an autogynephile is, and they don't understand how porn and, you know, mainstream porn, which has sort of traveled alongside the whole transgender movement, you know, as porn's become more mainstream, trans is just with it. You know, they don't understand what an autogynephile is or how they're created through pornography.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and men who get off on watching women be defiled and want to be defiled like that think that they're actual women because they enjoy it. That's the essence of it. I mean, it's, you know, it's gross, but that's really how simple it is.
Mm. Now, I don't know if this is true, but if anyone can tell us in the comments, I'd appreciate it. But someone told me it's estimated that 75% of transgender women actually have autogynephilia, this sexual arousal at the thought of oneself being a woman. That's a huge number, huge. If it's 75%, if that's true, like that's massive. Yeah.
I wouldn't be surprised. Look, 5 minutes on any of these social media sites and the sort of people that are out there going, trans women are women. You have a quick click on their profile and they're, hypersexualized, versions of caricatures of womanhood. They're not, just normal women. They're always like hypersexualized and hyper feminine and, overtly sexual. And that to me is the biggest red flag for AGP.
Mm-hmm. Yep, they're out there. And, the other thing is I have watched interviews with men that are open about the fact they have autogynephilia. And I remember one guy saying, when he first read up on autogynephilia, he was like, oh my God, this is me. And, it was like this revelation. And and he's embraced it and decided that he's going to transition and go down that path. Okay, that's great. But, if you're, say, a 15-year-old boy and you're dealing with these feelings for the first time, like, it must be so hard. You must be thinking, oh, there's something wrong with me. Why am I aroused by putting on mum's stockings or whatever it is? So I really think that awareness around this, it needs to get out there. It needs to reach health professionals and psychologists so that they know what they're talking about when they're, treating these sort of men. And also for the men themselves so that they can understand what they're going through and can make that decision. Okay, do I want to transition or do I want to explore therapy as an option to sort of find a way through this? I
think porn's responsible for a lot of dysfunction in society, particularly for men. People are quick to talk about the impact of pornography on women because it's tangible, but it's rotting men's brains. It's it's affecting relationships, it's affecting their self-esteem, it's creating like guys with perversions that normally wouldn't have those perversions except for their exposure to pornography, and it's unlimited pornography. Like there's no safeguarding on porn. The average age in Australia of a child watching pornography for the first time is 11. Crazy. And there are kids, and if that's the average, then there's a lot of kids that are under that age. Now that's going to impact on people's brains, and just from the conversations I've had with other parents are reluctant to talk about it for obvious reasons. So, kids, they're sort of turning a blind eye and going, look, it's not happening, I don't want to talk about it. And then all of a sudden your kid comes home and he's got some weird thing in his head, that he's a AGP or that he's a female because he's been watching too much porn. And parents are like, what, how did this happen? And if you scratch beyond the surface and you say, did you know your child was watching pornography? Oh, I kind of thought he was. He spends a lot of time in his room, So you have to open up the conversations. But unfortunately the media, which is also promoting the trans thing, is normalizing porn, saying, oh, it's normal to watch heaps of porn. Oh, it's normal to be a sex worker. These things are great, as long as you're getting, as long as you're not hurting anybody. You can hurt yourself. People don't care if you hurt yourself. But, they're sort of normalizing a behavior that has proven to be harmful by, psychologists, psychiatrists, all the people that study the human mind and human behavior. There's been a massive upshoot in young men in their, teens and early 20s committing murders and other violent crimes. And every single one of them is a porn addict.
There you go.
And yet that'll be like one of the last things on the article about, the murder and their motivation or what happened to the victim. And it's, it's down at the very bottom. He blames his pornography use for his behavior. And it's just like a byline and nobody's going, look, it's the porn, I
think that's a woman, Melinda T. Rice. She runs Collective Shout, is it? So she's doing really good work, and I think she's got a male partner who works with her, and they go out to schools and just change the conversation and educate girls and boys about, you know, what's really going on with pornography and sexual harassment, sexual assault. And like the response she's getting, it looks like she's doing really well. You know, can we, excuse me, federal government, can we get funding for that in all states and territories, please?
I'd like to see age verification. Age verification is really important.
Yeah.
You know, that children shouldn't be able to access all this hardcore stuff. Because when we're talking about pornography, it's a bit like the trans argument. People don't realize, you know, what it actually is. Like, we're not just talking about people, you know, filming themselves having sex and uploading it to the internet. We're talking about like scary stuff like bestiality, furries, you know, gangbang, faking rape, faking incest, you know, incest, child pornography, all sorts of really dodgy shit is one click away. One click into Pornhub. That stuff's completely unregulated. And a lot of people who, you know, they just don't want to know that what's there. They don't want to go. They go, oh, well, I'm only, and even the people that use porn go, well, I only look at my specific thing. So I'm not contributing to the massive revolting things that are out there. But, you know, they're out there still. There are people that are seeking out that stuff. And they also know that the nature of porn, and it's a bit like the nature of autogynephilia, in that it starts off, oh, you know, might grow my hair out, might, you know, wear a dress, whatever, and it escalates into this quite disturbing behavior. And porn use is one of those other things that starts off quite innocuous and then escalates to need a bigger fix to get the satisfaction that the behavior brings, you know.
And even in some men, it ends up in sexual dysfunction, and you can't get it up unless you're watching porn. Like, do you really want to be that dependent on it, guys? Come on.
Yeah, well, I think that's I think that's, you know,
karma.
Karma. But yeah, it is, you know, it is a problem. I'm not saying how I know, but yeah, it is a problem.
All right. Well, any other things you'd like to add before
you know, we're in Melbourne, and we're in lockdown. Melbourne is the wokest of the woke. We are the most affected by trans ideology. We've had self-ID for a couple of years now, and women are being directly impacted. I personally have been directly impacted by trans women, trans-identifying women, autogynephiles in women-only spaces, and I have heard of a lot of other women being impacted. Holly Lawford Smith's got that amazing website, No Conflict, where women are recording their experiences of, you know, finding both men and trans-identifying men in women's only spaces. But, you know, Melbourne, it's really starting to hit. It'll be interesting after lockdown, when people start going out into the world again, to see how many of these men are in our women-only spaces. And we've been very quiet, obviously, because we've been in lockdown for 3 months. And just before that, we had a protest at the ABC where we had, like, was it 30 or something women turned up?
Yeah, it was a good turnout,
for a first protest. A lot of people that went along had never been to a protest before. You know, that was a good turnout, because people are actually waking up. You know, they're starting to wake up to this ideology and the dangers of it, but they're still very afraid, particularly in a town that's as captured as Melbourne, to speak up.
Yeah.
You know, and we have to, you know, be brave. And for those of us who can, you know, I mean, even in the public service, people are threatened with, you know, losing their job if they're not affirming trans identities, and, you know, are intimidated into putting pronouns in their bios and things like that. So, you know, I recognise that a lot of people have too much to lose for speaking up publicly. But, you know, if you can't show your face and give your name, there's other things that you can do to be involved, you know, in fighting back against this dangerous ideology.
Absolutely. Yeah. You know, we really are the wokest of the woke here. We had the pretty extreme legislation passed at the start of this year banning gay conversion therapy. That's like, yep, that sounds great, but it also put a ban on essentially any explorative therapy for children with gender dysphoria, and adults with gender dysphoria as well. Like there must be adults with the condition that don't want to transition. So then it becomes, well, where do they go for help if the therapy on offer is essentially criminalized? And this has put a dampener on psychologists and psychiatrists taking on those patients. Serious problems. And now we see the same thing happening over in New Zealand. They're trying to essentially pass the same thing that was passed here in Victoria, and we also have anti-vilification laws on the horizon. The Victorian government has been doing consulting around that. They've come out with a couple of papers on it. I'm going to have to look into that and work out where it's up to. But gender identity is definitely included on the list of things you could be arrested for a hate crime if you say the wrong thing. And interestingly, they have included women on that list as well. So unlike in Scotland, where they left women off the list, but they included, trans women, essentially giving trans women more rights than women. Victoria's going the whole hog there. So, it could work in our favour, maybe.
Yeah, see you in jail. But yeah, these anti-vilification laws, even though in practice, they probably don't mean anything, they do intimidate. People are afraid of being dragged before a tribunal, and we've seen it in other states. Like women have been dragged before tribunals and told to pay fines for misgendering or allowing others to misgender on their Facebook pages, or and it's the threat of that. I know when I've complained that I've been threatened with, someone will sue us, or there's nothing we can do about it, we don't want to get in trouble, so we're going to allow this man to do whatever he wants because we don't want to be answerable to anybody. So the trans activists weaponize it. So even though in reality they probably wouldn't get it off the ground if they took you to tribunal for refusing to affirm their gender, the threat is there, and it's enough to intimidate most people because it takes a lot of emotional energy and financial resources to defend yourself in one of these tribunals, whether it's right or wrong.
Yeah, it's intimidating for anyone that's ever been renting and had to go to VCAT to get something sorted with the landlord. It's intimidating. It's unless you're a lawyer and you work in that environment regularly, it's something that you're not used to. And if you're not into public speaking, it's hard to get up and stand your ground in front of a group of judges. Yeah.
I'm glad women were recognised. I'm glad that you're telling me that women are, going to be protected too as a protected characteristic. That's great. That surprises me for Victoria because they've sold us out in every other aspect. So that's positive. Because I think, I work in women's domestic violence, and, I'm really worried about having women-only spaces, women-only safe spaces. I'm really concerned, even funding for the groups that we are trying to get off the hand. We're in a domestic violence epidemic. And in order for our support groups to be funded, we have to tick a little box that says that we're inclusive of LGBT, whatever. Now, it doesn't really say what that means, but just ticking the box when, in my mind, I will let a man into a women's only domestic violence service over my dead body. But just ticking that box, it's like, I don't feel comfortable with this. So, it's all creeping in, and that discomfort. And if someone is adamant about their beliefs as me, can be intimidated, then the average person's just going to go, I don't want to deal with this. But then trans activists are relying on that. The government is relying on that. The people that are pushing through this legislation is relying on most people going, I can't deal with this. This is too much. And this is how all this has happened. You know? And it is beginning to impact because people are like, oh, you're just making it up. The trans people just want to live in peace. They just want to go to the toilet and that's it. No, I've seen it. I've experienced it. I've heard about it. You know, these people don't want that. They want to come into women's only spaces and make them about them. They want to intimidate all the people in that space. And they want to claim that for their own. You know, the person that I last encountered in a women's only space had the option of a women's space, a male space, and an LGBTQ space, and they chose the women's space.
There you go.
All of those, and he chose the women's space.
There you go. Yeah.
And women left crying and said they'd never come back.
Maybe we can talk about that.
You know, all he did was be there and you know, talk about things. Like, he didn't attack anyone, he didn't do anything bad, but just a male energy in that space was so traumatizing for those women.
Yeah.
You know,
it's like you know, one of the stories I read on No Conflict, they said, was a woman in Perth who had gone out to the theatre to watch a live performance, and at the end of the show she's waiting in line with a bunch of other women to use the toilet. There's a trans woman in line with them, and as they get closer to, you know, their turn to use the toilet, there was a tampon dispenser in the women's toilets, and this trans woman has said to her friend who's there with him, "Oh, fancy a tamp?" Like, what kind of lame ass joke is that? It just proves that he's not a woman. No woman would ever say something so fucking stupid in the women's toilets. And this woman was really, you know, sort of taken aback by it. And she said afterwards she went and told her male partner what had happened, who was there at the show with her. And he just sort of said, yeah, because it's a sexual thing for them. And she said at the time, she was still in a sort of liberal feminist mindset of, oh no, that's transphobic. You can't, it's not a sexual thing. What are you talking about? And her boyfriend just like rolled his eyes. He's like, oh my God. It's like guys seem to understand this even better than a lot of women. Yeah, because, you know, they've got that insight into just how depraved some men can become. So yeah. Well, like, why do women need to experience that when lining up for the toilets? It's let alone in, you know, a support group, you know?
Yeah.
Crazy times.
I'll probably get doxxed now because of where I work and be like, oh, where does she work?
Oh, God.
Don't care.
Let him. We'll crowdfund for you, Ange.
The first couple of times, and this is the thing, the first couple of times people, you know, find out your name and where you work and, you know, where you live and stuff like that, like, it's terrifying. It's absolutely terrifying. But, you know, what do they do? What can they do, really? I mean, obviously, if you're you know, employed in a workspace that's completely woke, that can make things difficult for you as regarding your employment, as we see overseas, particularly, and even here in, you know, in the universities where gender critical women are bullied out of, you know, jobs and things. But, you know, but if you're just afraid that people are going to call you a transphobe, you know, don't be afraid of that, you know, because it's not true. You know, there's no such thing as transphobia, because, you know, transphobia is an irrational fear. But nobody's afraid of trans women. We're afraid of men. We're afraid of men, and we have reason to be afraid.
It's completely justified, really. And
not all men are, you know, not all men are predators, but we have safeguarding for that reason.
Yep, that's right. All right, I think that might be a good spot to finish up. So thanks, Ange.
Thank you. Thanks for getting me out of the lockdown sort of staring at the wall thing. Yeah, thank you.
It was great. And let's do it again next Sunday.
Let's do it. Okay, bye.
Thanks for watching, everyone.
See ya.
Bye.